So this is an example of a meme hack. And you can see, looking over here on my layers panel, how many layers this is made up of. This is one single layer here, and then there's a background image that's at a very low opacity of 30%. There's several layers of text here, and I have the image that's on another layer. And one of these layers of text, if you zoom in, is at a very low opacity, and that's really where the meme is, where right under where it says the miracles of science, it says that allows us to create environmental disasters and the miracles of our legal department to keep us from harm. This was a student, past student example, by the way. So this is a pretty good example of a meme hack. And one of the links that I gave you on Blackboard talks about different ways that you can use guides and all of the new features in Photoshop Creative Cloud for using guides. But I wanted to sort of back up and show you kind of the old-fashioned way of working with guides, which might be enough for these projects. So first of all, you want to make sure you have your rulers visible to work with guides. And so if you don't have your rulers visible, you're going to go up to View from the main menu and choose Rulers. By the way, since we're here, I want to point out that under Show, you have a couple of things, Smart Guides and Grid as well. So if I have a grid, I can also use this to help line up elements on my page. So when you're working with a meme hack, I'd like you to try to think of your file, your page, regardless if you're doing a flyer, a poster, a magazine cover. I want you to think about it as a grid and to try to line up the different elements. I'd like to see nice columns, spaces where the text is aligned, where images are aligned to each other. It doesn't have to look totally boxy like a complete grid, but the purpose of working with the guides is so that you can align the different elements to each other. So I find that working with a grid is a little bit too crowded, so I'm going to turn that off. I'm going to go back to Show and turn Grid off and instead use the guides. So the first thing I might do, now that I have my rulers, I can make a guide by clicking into a ruler and drag it out. The first thing I might do is to set up margins all around. And so typically, every single piece of paper that you write on, if you were going to turn in a paper for an English paper, for example, you would not write edge to edge. You would have a margin there. And the same is true for an advertisement. So I would put these guides here. The guides do not print out, by the way. I want you to keep the guides, but if you ever make a bunch of mistakes and you want to get rid of them, you can go back under View and choose Clear Guides, and you'll get rid of them all. I want you to keep the guides so when I look at your Photoshop files, I can see that you did use them. So now that I have my guides here, I can make sure that all of my text and images stay within this 1/4 inch margin that I've put up. And I see that it hasn't. This image is a little bit above, so I could then choose this one and decide to move this down, and then I have to move the other ones down, and so on and so forth. So the guides can be great to help you get going with your margins and make sure that everything stays. Guides can also be really helpful. Let's say if you want to align things that aren't right next to each other. If I want the edge of this smaller logo to align with the edge of this image, that creates like a nice grid there. So I'm going to use a guide by just clicking and dragging out, and that's going to allow me to create that guide, and I can see whether or not they are perfectly aligned. Another thing that I'd like you to keep in mind when you're working with your meme hack is, so I'd like you to have margins, space all around. I'd like all of the separate elements on the page to have space around them. So in other words, I wouldn't want this text to be right underneath the image, or this logo to be right next to the text. Everything should have space around it. This is a perfect example of a nice amount of space. The space that you see between this image and the text over here creates like a nice transparent column, and that's what you should be looking for. Look at the space, not just of the space of the images and the text, but also the space in between those different elements. So lastly, if you need to move one of these guides, you can take your Move tool and hover it over a guide, and then you can click and drag it out. So I can take this one and move it, and let's say, and I can grab more and more guides. So let's say if I wanted to align something to the top and to the bottom, I want to see what it would look like with another image here that takes up the same height. So you can just keep clicking and dragging and getting out more and more guides. So keep in mind with the meme hack that the text that you put here needs to be factual. It shouldn't just be something that's made up for the sake of just saying something silly about a particular company or a stereotype even. Try to get some actual facts, and you can present those in very small type, something like what you see down here, or very faded type. The point is, at first glance, it should look like a real advertisement, but once we actually look at either what the images are really doing or the small text, we understand that the text that's on there is actually subverting the original intention of the advertiser.